Morning, good afternoon. Depends on which coast you're on. And thank you for joining us today to go over really about ThreatLocker storage control. Hopefully you got to join the last few sessions yesterday and on Monday, where we discussed how a default deny application whitelisting approach is really effective at stopping malware without hoping your antivirus is going to detect the latest piece of malware. But also our ring fencing as well, where we showed how fileless malware can be used against you and how ring fencing can stop those good apps being weaponized and used against you. Today, we're going to jump into the storage part of ThreatLocker, and we touched a little bit on it yesterday with the ring fencing, where we can actually say what applications can access your storage devices, what storage devices can be used, what USB devices can be used. But it's much more than the traditional, we're just blocking USB drives. It's much more granular than that, so we're going to dive into that. We do have a Q&A section, so if you do have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A section. If you do want to talk, it seems as though nobody wants to raise their hand and talk, but you can also raise their hand and you can verbally ask those questions. The sessions will be recorded and they will be available on demand afterwards as well, for anyone that missed them. We're joined by Nick. Nick works in our channel, with our channel partners, MSPs, signing up and helping them get ThreatLocker deployed. So Nick, thank you for joining us today as well.
No problem. Thank you. I'm really interested to see. I know a lot of the MSPs that I speak with are consistently worried about people saving things on the desktop, USB drives for security, things like that, and what types of files that they can actually control. So I'm excited to see, how this is relatable and usable in the MSP's life. So thank you for the introduction.
Okay. So to get started, and I'll recap on the beginning part of this. If you're getting ThreatLocker deployed, whether you're using the storage, the application control, everything combined, the process of deploying this is really easy. We have scripts that go straight into your RMM. You can roll them out. It could create your clients. It's fully multi-tenant. You can have different tenant policies, different computer policies, and you can switch between all your organizations on the organizations page here. So very, very easy to get started. One of the things we do with the storage, and probably the first thing that's almost what gets most MSPs most excited about storage, is the audit part of it. So we're not just giving you a USB blocking tool. What we're doing is we're giving you a complete file management system where you can see everything that's happening on all of your files. And just to give you an example, if you do have ThreatLocker deployed, the moment you deploy it, no policies are required for this. You can go into here and you can, any files that are created on any network shares, on any external storage, are going to be automatically monitored. So if you have a user that goes onto a network share and they create a text document or a Word document or something like that, they edit that, they copy it to a USB drive, which I think will get blocked. We'll find out in a second. Yeah. Or they copy it to their documents folder, delete that file. Whatever they do with that file, it is going to be logged here in the audit in real time. And I'll just show you how easy that is to find what happened to that file. Now, one of the cool things about this is even if they're sitting in Starbucks or this is definitely today, it's taking its time to come in, or they're in the office or they're working from home, you're going to be able to see these files there all the time. And you can literally see the full history there of everything that happened. Now, one of the big things we hear from MSPs is that their users, a lot of the calls they get are somebody's moved a file, somebody's lost a file. So if you're using ThreatLocker and somebody moves a file by mistake, if they've got a mouse malfunction that's essentially caused them to lose a file, you can see where they moved it to, who deleted it, what program they used to move it, what folder it was moved to. All of that is logged in the audit here. So when you do have a client call you up, whether it's intentional or by mistake, you're going to be able to see what happened here. And then we're not just going to see who, but we're going to see what program. And this is important as well, because if you're accusing somebody of accessing a file, you want to make sure that they did access it. It wasn't an antivirus or something on their computer that accessed it. So if I take this one, for example, Notepad, access this file, it was actually opened in Notepad. It was then saved to in Notepad. So you know that this is a user doing an action with a specific application. You'll actually see that the antivirus tried to read it and it was denied, and we'll get into the storage policies afterwards, but potentially if it was allowed, you could misclassify that and accuse the user of doing something that they didn't do. But in this case, it was actually the antivirus that just read it. It was then read by Explorer, where I tried to copy it to my USB drive. My USB drive wasn't encrypted. I can see the serial number, the drive, the person that did it, everything about that file, what they tried to do with it, whether it's permitted or denied, is in the audit here. We can see that I then wrote it to my documents folder, read it again, and then again, the antivirus read it. And you see here now the antivirus was allowed to read it because I don't have a policy for that. And then I can see that I finally deleted it. So when you do have somebody who's copying data to USB drives, if they're deleting files, if they're moving things, you're going to be able to see that in real time in the audit here. Now, the audit is pretty popular and it kind of saves a lot of bacon sometimes, but the real goal of this is to harden your system, is to put more security in place. And there's a few different areas where we see this is very common. If anyone, I don't know if any of the guys here have got healthcare clients or any kind of HIPAA regulation clients. So if they do, that one of the requirements for HIPAA is that you block unencrypted USB drives. You're not allowed to use portable storage that is not encrypted. So if somebody copies a patient's record onto a disk and that disk isn't encrypted, then you're violating HIPAA. And we can put very simple policies in place here that do things like that. So for example, I have a policy in place here that denies read and write access to, and you see all of these parameters in these policies. You can get very granular, but in this case, I'm just saying anything that's on the USB interface that is not encrypted. Regardless to the user and group, regardless to which program it was, if it's on that USB interface and it's not encrypted, then it's going to get denied. And what I've done here is I've given the user the option to request permission. What that means is when they copy something to that disk, if they're not allowed, they're going to get a pop-up that says, do you want to request permission? And they can come here and say, okay, I need to request permission to copy homework to this device. And they can put the request in here and they can literally hit send request. And when they do that, you're going to get an email, you're going to get a text message as the IT guy, as the MSP saying, this user's requested access to this drive. So you can then go and create an exception around that. You can say, okay, this drive, based on its serial number, I'm going to allow because this user has a legitimate business need. They're not going to copy healthcare information. They're not going to copy anything private onto it. I'm going to allow it even though it's not encrypted. I'm going to allow this device for any device in the any computer in that group. So maybe it's the IT guy and he needs to install software from a USB drive. You're allowing that one disk, so he or she can now walk around all of the computers and can enable that drive. And what that did in the background is it literally just created a policy for that drive to allow it. And it's very, very simple to create these exceptions. You can see here that this was denied. I clicked on it. It's now allowed. And within 60 seconds, the user can do this. Again, if they're out and about and they need access to a drive temporarily, you can allow that drive. I was at a trade show going back January earlier this year, and I realized as soon as I plugged a USB device into my laptop to copy my PowerPoint so I could give it to the trade show, it was being denied. And I hit request permission and I called someone and they said, can you permit this? And 60 seconds later, I was able to use that device.
Hey, Danny, we got a question from the chat. It was Daniel asked, does this work for network shares? And how about file server? Can you see which user accessed the file? I think you may have answered that.
Yes, so the audit does work. It works for network shares, it works for file servers, it works for USB drives, DVD drives, and even local drives. And I'll go into that now as well. But even if you get down to like local C drives, you can actually monitor folders on there. So in this case, just to go a little bit further on this USB drive, let's say that, okay, I just permitted this USB drive because it's actually a digital camera and the user's trying to upload photos. It's not healthcare information, or maybe it is healthcare information, but the doctor took a picture on his camera and he wants to upload it onto the computer and he can't do that. So we've allowed this device, but then I realized, oh, well, the doctor can now copy other files onto this camera and use this to extract data. We don't want to allow that. So what I could do is I could also change it to just read only. And I could also say, I only want to allow picture files, and I've got PNGs on here, so I use PNGs. And by doing that, the person can still use the device. They can still use that drive. I'm going to give it a minute to replicate. Hopefully I'll wait long enough. And they can still open images on here. They can still copy images off, so I can copy that into my documents folder. It's only read only, so I can't delete it. And you'll see here it actually tried to read that 9i installer. But I can't open anything else because all of those other types of files are blocked. Now, jumping back to the question on network drives, the audit and the control, I'm going to show you some examples on the control, do apply to network drive. So if you have a mapped network drive, and in my case, I hadn't mapped it there, but you can do it mapped or you can do it just to the UNC, but I'll map one here. Share. So I have a mapped network drive here. If I go on here and I do create a document, just like before, it does actually audit that for me. And if I delete that file, it's being audited as well. And we'll see here in the in the audit, that action happened. So I can see there that again, my antivirus tried to read it and I don't have permission for my antivirus. Now, I want to talk a little bit about these permissions here with the, how you can actually set permissions, not just to user, but to programs. And I'm going to use QuickBooks as an example first. One of the big challenges people often have with QuickBooks is when you do the database repair on it, it opens up permissions to the everyone group on the file server for that QuickBooks database. So anyone in the company can see all the financial data, which is just stupid. One of the things you can do in ThreatLocker is you can actually override those permissions. You can create your own permissions that don't use the NTFS permissions, and you can say who can access that folder. So I could say, in the case of this network share, I only want certain people to be able to access this. I can do it from the file server side, where actually, and this is a loopback share, but I could actually create a policy around the share, or I can do it from the share side. And by doing that, I can say that only certain users are allowed to access that folder. And just like before, if I went out here and I said, I only want certain users here, they would get that pop up and it would get blocked. But what else you can do is you can also limit it to certain programs. So let's talk about QuickBooks or Veeam or whatever your software is. If you think you've got a user who's trying to access the QuickBooks database and they want to copy that to steal that data, if you allow them to browse to that folder, they can just go in and copy it. If you're restricting access to just QuickBooks, then they can open it through QuickBooks just like before, but they can't browse to it, they can't copy the data. And I use this as an example. I'll use Notepad. I'm just gonna, the only programs that are allowed to access this share, I don't have QuickBooks here, is Notepad and Explorer. If I remove Explorer from here, which is a pretty locked down share now, and I jump on my share, I'm gonna give that a minute to replicate. Hopefully I've waited long enough. You can see I don't have permission to the share. I literally can't see it. I can go into command prompt. I can't see it. If I can open up PowerShell as it is nowadays. I just don't have permission to that share because that program doesn't allow permission. But if I want to go into Notepad, because Notepad has permission, I can still open that file in Notepad. And you can see there something's trying to read my USB drive again. Or I think it was. So I can still open those files in Notepad because I gave it just to that application. Now, this is important for a few things. One is you can harden your shares. You can essentially build these fences around your shares to say, I only want this program to access it. That means if somehow you do get ransomware, and if you're using the whitelisting, obviously that's very difficult. But let's assume that one day you accidentally allow ransomware. Someone turns on monitor only. I've got this override policy to say these are the only programs that are allowed to access my network share. So if somebody does try to encrypt your files, it's not going to be able to access it. If PowerShell tries to encrypt it, even if you don't have it ring fenced, it's not going to be able to access that share because it's not in the list of trusted programs here that are allowed to access it. And I can, of course, I can auto populate that as well. So if I wanted to see what is actually accessing my files, I can see a Windows Defender is accessing my files, and I'm going to get rid of some of these because I don't want them in there. DLL hosts has tried to access it and PowerShell tried to access it. And potentially these can all be bad programs. What I've seen a lot of companies do is actually set up storage policies where only trusted apps, only Office, only Chrome, or not Chrome even necessarily, can access their network shares. Only backup software can access their backup drives. And this is really going to harden your environment from ransomware being able to encrypt your files. And that's a very popular use case. from them. So I remove them out of there. Of course, I mentioned blocking unencrypted USB drives, but equally we can just block all USB drives. So this policy here says deny read and write access to any USB drive, regardless to whether it's encrypted or not, regardless to the program. But again, just like before, where I showed I could only allow certain programs to access the network share, I can do that on the USB drive. So we had a police department and they wanted the police department to be able to bring in their body cams. And these body cams are essentially mass storage devices, plug them into the computer and upload using their evidence.com software, import it into the system. They didn't want them to be able to go on and browse the file system with this camera and delete the video. They wanted it so as soon as it plugged in, the only program that could see it was the evidence software. They could open the evidence software and do an import. So again, in that case, what they did is they allowed the serial numbers for those devices, but only for the evidence software. And
Daniel, I wanted to ask too, Daniel had another question about protecting the files at the server level, or do you have to do it at the workstation? And in addition to that, I think manageability wise, this is something you can do at a global level or specific clients and their own networks.
Let me just, so this is on the chat, is it? And
yes.
Put the chat as well, because I'm only seeing the questions for some reason. Okay, so yes, so if you have the software installed on the server, you have certain protections at the server, and there's a few things you can do. One is you can say, like you can protect by the file, you can protect by the file type, you can protect by the user. What you can't protect by is the application, because the application doesn't allow, the client doesn't allow us to see what application is actually accessing it. Now, what you can do on the new build is you can say, there's something called remote presence. It's not on this one, where you can say from the server side, if the client isn't running ThreatLocker, then don't allow it access to my server. So if someone comes onto your network and says, I want to access these files without a ThreatLocker client, you're going to say, no, you can't access that. But you have certain policies from the server side. You have more policies from the client side, because on the client side, you get that extra bonus. You're not just seeing the user, but you're also seeing the program they're running and what's going on their machine and other factors as well. So it is good to have it on both sides. The other thing, if you're doing it on the server side anyway, the way ThreatLocker's licensing works is essentially you can either do it by user or you can do it by device. But if you're having clients connect to a file server, you have the device license for each client that connects anyway. So you might as well just install the agent on all the PCs to give you that extra benefit, because it's not costing you anymore. Another good example, and there are a lot of different examples on here, but I'm just trying to show you the most common ones. This deny $C share. So we had a client who signed up. They were in the middle of a Emotek attack, and it kept spreading through their $C shares, their admin dollar shares. And they implemented the whitelisting, but it was already running before they installed ThreatLocker. So they had to go around and I don't know why they didn't turn off all the machines, but they decided they were just going to leave the machines running. But we were able to stop it spreading, even though it was already executed pre-ThreatLocker. And by putting these policies in place, denying write access to $C shares is another, admin dollar shares is a very, very easy way to stop lateral movement inside your network of malicious code. And you can even do that down to a file type. So for example, we had a client who didn't want users to be able to save video files to the network share because they kept using all the space and they kept uploading all these video files. So we could go in here and we could say, I want to deny MP4 on network share. And we could do it on all network shares or just some. Again, we can give them the pop-up, do you want to request permission, or we can just make it silent. So we can say here, okay, on this server, no MP4 files are allowed. So if somebody tries to write an MP4 on there, it's going to get denied. Very, very effective. It stops people wasting space on the server. Simple policy, enforces good behavior. Another use case is, I used to do a lot of penetration testing and things like that. And one of the ways I would get onto a network is I'd get someone to run something. And of course, if you're using the whitelisting, that really helps deal with that. But let's assume I get someone on the front desk to run something on their computer, either plugging in a rubber ducky and it automatically running from a download, or just sending them an email. When they would run that program, I could essentially spin up a reverse shell on their computer. So I could now access their command line, copy files to network shares.
New visitor
and
in the queue.
If they didn't have the data that I wanted to access, what I would do is I would get them to, I would actually copy an executable onto a file share and replace like an Excel file with an executable and I'd put an Excel icon on it. So then someone else in the company would open that file from the file share thinking it's the same file they open every day, but it was actually opening the malware. So blocking EXEs on network shares that don't need EXEs is another good example of ways you can just harden your environment and reduce that surface area of attack. Another use case that we've seen used quite a lot, and this is my favorite one because we go to a lot of trade shows, or we did go to a lot of trade shows, and now we just go to one. But we did go to a lot of trade shows pre-March this year, and one of the things that would drive me insane is every time we get to a trade show, the sales guy would come in, he'd open up the laptop, and he'd have icons all over their desktop, Excels, quotes, customer orders. I was like, why are those files on your desktop? They're driving me insane. It's like, oh, well, they're just there temporarily, and they're in the system as well. And I remember saying to one of the guys once, well, delete everything now. If they're already in the system, just delete them. I don't want to see them on the desktop. Oh, I need to get some stuff off it first. It's like, well, this isn't being backed up. You're saying you've got customer orders on your desktop that aren't being backed up. So what we did is we put a policy in place that essentially denies write access to the desktop. So we said, I want to deny write access. And in this case, it just says to these file types, but you could do any file types or all files to the desktop folder. And again, I don't want the user to get a pop-up creating a ticket every time they get denied. The answer is simple. You're not allowed to access that desktop. Hopefully I can get back on my share now. You just deploy policy so I can get back on my share. Just see what's blocking my share. One of the cool things about this as well is when something does get denied, you can always go into the audit here to say, well, what policy is denying this? So in this case, I've obviously got some kind of policy that doesn't allow it. So let me go back into my policies. Let's go into the default policy, which means it's probably this one here.
Danny, I know we touched on this before, but is this something that you can see if you need to prove it to a client that something happened, but is there reporting out of this where you can kind of bring all this together and do like for QBRs with the MSPs and their clients or something like that, something a bit more client facing?
Yeah, so there's various reports you can do here. So there's obviously the audit here where you can go in and you can say, this is the detail, and you can say, show me everything that's written to a USB drive, show me everything that's being accessed on this share. And I'm sure that's the same thing, but let me just, something wrong with my policy here. So you can see the detail, but we also have a bunch of pre-CAN reports, things like show me which USBs are being used in the organization, show me who's deleted files in the last 7 days, show me who the mass deleters are, who these kind of files as well. You can see who's deleting files, how many have deleted, and you can see all of that in the audit here. I seem to have some caching issues going on here. There you go, it's come back to life now. So if I try to copy this file back to the point of I said I don't want people to write things to the desktop, I literally just get an access is denied. Even if I'm a local admin, I cannot copy files to that folder. Now, I do want to touch on the local stuff because we consider by default anything that is external storage, any network shares, any USB drives, any SD cards, CD-ROMs, they're all considered external storage. But in addition to that, we have, you can also choose to monitor internal storage. Now, I will say don't go and monitor your entire C drive because you'll end up with a bad day and your computer running really slow. Although it's only a few milliseconds, there's literally millions of files that scratch on certain folders on your C drive every single minute. But you can go in here. I've created a policy here called protect local assets, and you can actually just add any folder in, even on your C drive. So I've got my documents, my Dropbox, my desktop, and it will actually monitor those drives as if they were remote drives and give you the same level of control and the same policies on them. And you'll notice, I think actually, if you create a new group today, if you've got existing groups, they might not be there. But if I create a new group, it takes a minute to create that group. It'll actually create a bunch of those standard policies for me, and it will show me, oh, I'm going to monitor your documents folder, I'm going to monitor your desktop folder, and you can go off and edit those if you want. Give that a second to creates a lot of policies when you create new groups. So if you see here on a new group, there's a whole bunch of policies here that say which local folders, CD drives, USB, network storage, and you can edit this and you can see which local folders you want to monitor. Like some people might even say, I want to make sure people can't change the System32 drivers host file. So they could create a policy that says the host file is read-only or the startup folder is read-only, and it stops certain system folders being changed as well. So that's quite effective as well at blocking other local things that you might not want done. The nice thing, really the goal is here is a few things. One is we want to stop unauthorized software accessing our network shares, accessing our data folders, accessing our backup shares. And that's very, very simple. You create a policy, you deny everything that isn't trusted. These policies run top to bottom. You can apply them at the organization level, you can apply them at the computer level. So there's a lot of customization there. The other thing we want to do is obviously if our environment doesn't call for external storage for USB drives, we can block those devices, we can restrict those devices, and it's very, very easy to approve. And then we're really starting to get about security policies, things like blocking admin dollar shares, and they're going to harden our environment even more, but also business policies or stopping people save things in locations that aren't backed up, like their desktop, or stopping people upload videos to the server, or even stopping people upload things from the web. And we talked about that in ring fencing yesterday, but the same applies with this. I don't allow any access from Google Chrome to my network share. So if I don't allow that and somebody tries to send a file, not that one, I'll find one of these sites that doesn't make me sign up. That application does not have access to my network share. So if I go into here, it just can't see it. It can't upload it. It can't install it. All of that is not allowed.
We did have one question in the Q&A. Not sure if you can see that.
So terminal server redirected drives, or are they treated as network drives, would be useful to prevent EPHI? Yeah, so actually, we almost want to take a policy away from that. So yes, you can set policies on terminal server redirected drives, and by default, your terminal server redirected policy drives are treated as remote storage. So if you have a policy to deny all remote storage, which you probably wouldn't, you'd have to create an exception around that from a network drive point of view. One of the things that we actually recommend, if you redirect your app data folder or any temporary internet folders, you just exclude them from it, because you don't want the temporary internet files logging millions and millions of rows every day, because that's where it spools data. But yes, you can set them. You can set redirected folders so they can only write, or they can't write, or they can only write certain types of files. And you can set policies around people being able to open those. And even VHDs, virtual hard disk, remote virtual hard disks, I think you see on a lot of VDIs, they can be done. And somebody's asked, do these policies work for system processes? And can an install program write to a protected folder? So if you create a protected folder, nothing can write to it, whether it's a system process. Now you can allow system processes to write for it if you want, but you could essentially say, if I wanted to allow system to write to the share, right now system cannot write to the share. And we saw that in the unified audit. We saw that the antivirus tried to access my share, even though it was a system process. It was denied because I have a policy that says nothing can access the share. In this case, it was read actually. But if I go back to my share here, we can see here that the antivirus tried to read that share, and it just doesn't have permission. It doesn't matter that it's an antivirus. It doesn't matter that it's a system process. It doesn't have permission. Now, if I wanted to exclude that so system processes could access it, you could do that. But in most cases, there's not many reason to do that, because what you're doing then is saying things like WannaCry could encrypt files. And of course, if you're using the whitelisting, those things can't run, but you're saying that anything that runs under the system context could access that data. So you can apply it, you can block at the system process. If someone elevates to PSExec, it's still going to deny it just because you connected a system. Hopefully, I'm just pull my chat window back up. So it is going to harden from there as well. And again, everything here, I keep saying this, it is here in the log. You can pull reports on it, you can export it, and you can set all these policies at an individual level. So if you have a user that wants USB drives, and you'll notice with the storage devices here, Computer's gone to sleep. Really has gone to sleep. I think it's going to log me out. Which portal am I actually using? Policies. We'll find out now. Oh, that one's logged me out. You'll notice here with the storage devices that you can actually set manufacturers, owners, and details like that in the policies. And you can also set policies. So if you said, I don't care, Bob's allowed to access any, allow Bob, you can actually just permit read and write and say, Bob can access any USB devices because I don't want to restrict Bob because he cuts my checks type thing. And you can get very granular on what you do. And just like a firewall, these policies kind of run from the top down. So, and you see the enterprise policies, they run first, and then the computer and the computer group, and you can apply them at different levels. Even as the managed service provider, you can create certain policies at the global level where you say, okay, anything that's trying to access a backup file can only be accessed by this backup software. And you can set that at the MSP level. So that applies to all of your customers. So I think from a demo point of view, we kind of got through this pretty quickly. Is there anybody who has any additional questions before we close out? I will. No, I think there's nothing else come in. Guys, there is a, if you don't already use ThreatLocker, and hopefully you got to see the session yesterday and the day before, there is a free trial. You can sign up for a free trial. You can go to portal.threatlocker.com/signup.espx. I'm going to dump that in the chat as well now so everybody can see that. They want to click on that link. You can reach out to Nick and he can provide you any kind of pricing as well on how that fits together. It really is very simple. I mean, the different layers of security we're trying to do is we're not trying to guess and use threat detection. What we're trying to do is put physical, real controls in place that stop bad stuff doing bad things. And that starts with the application whitelisting, the default deny, and at the beginning of the week, which we discussed on Monday, the ring fencing where we're saying what applications can do, and then the storage policies. And they are very, very effective ways at hardening your environment, stopping ransomware, encrypting your files, and also stopping user bad behavior, which ultimately leads to breaches, loss of data, files being deleted, things like that. And then at the back end of that, you've always got that audit. You've always got the log of who accessed the data. Did they upload it into the web? What website did they go to? What programs did they open? All of that is in the audit, and you can see that in real time. Guys, I appreciate everything. Thank you, Nick, for joining us. I see we got a few people join at the end. For those of you who joined at the end, we do have this on demand as well, so you can jump back in and watch it afterwards. Somebody's asked a question here. Can the multi-tenant interface be shared with the internal IT? Yes, you can give your customers direct access to their own portal. So whenever you're in a client, if you switch here, you can see I can jump into a client individually and I can actually invite their administrators. But I can do it after. So if I just set a user here, I'll go back into mine so I can show you the permissions, but I can also give them very granular control. So I can choose what I want them to do. I might not want the customer to be able to go in and set policies, because if they don't know what they're doing, they might allow certain single approvals. So if I go into administrators here and edit, I can do things like say, I'm going to allow approval for a single computer. I'm going to allow access to billing. I'm going to allow access to storage, to administrators, to reports, to the unified audit. I can allow access to storage policy. So you can actually get pretty granular on what your clients can do, or you can just give them super admin access to their own account as well. There's a lot of granularity there from an application point of view. But I think that seems to be all it for the questions, guys. Thank you very much. I will send out a follow-up email with this link in as well, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the 3 sessions. Enjoy the rest of your day.